Thank you. So I'll be talking about starting companies and raising money for those companies, myths and realities. You will learn neither of these things if you listen to people like me talking about it or anybody talking about it. You're not going to be able to do this. You really have to do it yourself. I like Mike Tyson's quote. You know what he said? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. For especially first time, if you want to build a company, that's kind of how it feels like. And you can only learn and figure it out once you get into it. I'll just run through my background, try to be quick there. And the purpose is to give you a sense of who I am as an entrepreneur, because what's important is that everybody's different. If you want to build a company, you can have your own skill set, your own vision, and it will be different from mine. And so I always had this kind of like maths affinity and background, even though I was never, great or super talented. And that's what made me join an investment bank back in 2000, I think 9 and 10, when I finished university. And I wasn't good enough for that career as well, because I thought I'm going to be this big shot investment banker that's going to work in the city of London and make a lot of money in bonuses, but that didn't really work. But I just didn't want to work for a big organization and having a lot of bosses telling me what to do. So that's why I founded a company called Green Finance back in 2012. We actually sold it over a period of several years to Capitec, which is one of the biggest retail banks in South Africa. So this year we're targeting 150 million revenue, net profit about 15 million. We have over 500 people working across different countries, so it's a pretty sizable operation. And so I stepped down from the everyday management, from the CEO position in that company, that first business back in 2020. And so the focus since then has been on basically doing the same thing, but not being involved in the active management of all these different businesses. My focus and my job now is to look for ideas in more or less the fintech space. I stick with what I know. The difference is when I find a good business idea or a business model, I look for a CEO that will run this business for me. We share equity. We also help through our platform to give debt financing for these different businesses. And that CEO is then responsible to take the business to the next step. A few companies that I'm involved with that I've started, Money.jo. It's the biggest non-bank finance company in Jordan. So we provide consumer loans, scooter loans, different types of loans where the consumer is the end borrower. We started it 3 years ago. This year we're planning a 50 million euro, but in local currency revenue. We're going to have about close to 500 people working there by the end of the year. Esketit.com, it's a crowdfunding loans marketplace like Mintos. I'm sure you've heard of Mintos. It's a very big one. Fourth biggest by volume in that niche with 20,000 investors. New School, that's again lending business that we started off in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. In those countries, it's very difficult to go in there and have your startup mentality and do something, because nobody gives a shit who you are, because they all have a lot of money. Everything is owned and managed by big families, and so you have to partner up with those families to do business in those countries. Then FU Capital, that's a slightly kind of off-tangent direction for us. So we do a real-world asset tokenization business where we want to make crypto-native investors, people that have Bitcoin and other coins, to be able to invest in our loan portfolios directly. The mastermind of that business is my business partner, Davis, and so he's the guy, he's my co-founder that we have built all these businesses together with. Sponda Capital, that's a company we started recently where we buy portfolios from banks and non-banks, then we give it to collection agencies and we try to make a spread in between. So that's like an asset management type of thing. The most important though in my career is I'm a YouTuber with almost 2,000 followers. So I'm hoping that with these presentations, I'm going to push my social media numbers up. All right, so how did I start my first business? So we didn't have this grandiose vision that we're going to build this amazing company, this tech-enabled lending thing. We had none of that. The reason we started online consumer loans business, one was that I was interested in finance, like I mentioned in the beginning. So this was like an industry that I was naturally kind of keen to look at and think about business models. Second, it was online. So back then, 2011-12, I'm still working in a bank in London. My business partner, Davis, my best friend, he's in Latvia. We're talking on Skype, thinking about, okay, what could we do? All sorts of random bullshit ideas. And then we noticed that there are a couple of companies that had started this online consumer loans through a text message. So that served as a proof of concept for us. It was kind of post-aftermath of 2008 crisis. So there were not a lot of businesses that were doing well. And those were. Weirdly, we thought that we're not going to need a lot of capital. With all my fucking investment banking experience and finance, I thought I'm going to build a lending company without having to have a lot of capital. So that's super stupid. Because of that, a friend of mine from university, he gave us the first 30,000 euros. And we gave the guy 45% of the company. I thought it's a great deal because we got 30K, right? Until I think in June, basically 2 months later, we had run out of this 30K. We gave it out in loans, we gave it out to a white label IT provider. And then it kind of like hit me that, okay, like we have jumped into this pool on the deep end. We don't really know what we're doing, but there is some excitement. People are coming to the website, they're taking out loans. Some of them are paying them back, surprisingly. So there is some traction, some excitement. And that was all it took to kind of like be confident to keep going. We did manage to correct that deal, that terrible 45% eventually, but the couple lessons here, the first one, is that you can make very dumb decisions, uninformed, inexperienced, like uneducated decisions because you're young and so on, and you can still be successful and your business can still grow, assuming that the business model is good. No matter how good the execution, how much funding you have, and how great you are, if you're inherently working on a shitty business idea or a bad business model, nothing is going to save you. Second, I'll talk about this often, so I want to drill this into you. Quick and cheap testing of an idea is far better than, analyzing or checking stuff for months and months and so on and so forth. I always really believe you just try to do quick, cheap tests, and only from there you will really learn the reality. And so I was thinking about how do I give you some practical advice, even though of course it's super hard to do it in 20-30 minutes, it's impossible. There are a number of questions that people ask me, and I'll give you some pointers, some tips from my experience against each of those questions. Number one, how to find a business idea. We had 2 guys asking me kind of like, what should we do when we're 20 years old? How do I find my business idea? The short answer is steal it or copy it rather. The reason I say this is because people are very different. Again, there are innovators, there are company builders, there are people that are great in deals and so on and so forth. It's important to kind of understand what's authentic for you. Follow your own interest and personality. I know I'm not an innovator. I'm not a person that's great at finding how to do things in a new way. I am, I think, pretty good at building companies. I can look at something that works and I can do it even better, faster, and I can do that multiple times at scale. That's a company builder approach. So for somebody that's a company builder, it's important to look for an idea that already exists. Proof of concept is out there. A couple companies that already are doing something and they're growing. One, and second, again, look for ideas that are quick and cheap to test out. Something that doesn't take 5 million, a huge infrastructure project as your first company that you will roll out in year 5. How to know if the idea is any good? All right, it's like drugs. I mean, you have to try it out. And I think more importantly, and you will never really know whether the idea is good or not by sitting and contemplating pros and cons and SWOT analysis. It's not going to happen. The idea is good if it's quick and cheap to test out. By quick and cheap, I mean 100, 200, 300,000. It takes a couple of months to get your first customers, some feedback. That's what I mean by an idea that's quick and cheap to test out. I love the problem, not the solution. This is kind of a Silicon Valley mantra, but it really makes sense. So be in love with the problem that you're trying to solve, because that's where you're going to get your customers and that's what people will pay you for, as opposed to ideas and functions and features on some kind of idea that you come up on your own. Pivoting, that's another cliche word. By pivoting, I don't mean it's great that you keep changing your business model. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It probably means it's bad. Pivoting, I mean, if you start your first company, to have a mindset that most likely you will end up in a couple of years' time in a different place to what you expected originally, right? You might have an idea of how you're going to make money, who's going to be your customer, your sales channels, and so on. Over a couple of months, all of that can change drastically. And if you accept that that's normal, you tell your employees that that's okay. It's just an adaptive mindset that helps you be less stressed out about changes, especially in the early days as you build the first company. Is it okay to start a business with a friend? And often people ask that. It's a bit like asking, is it okay to marry like a blonde person or a brown hair person? It's not the right question. The question for the business partner is whether they're hardworking, smart, ideally have some skills or some experience. Do they have super strong work ethic? Those are the things that you're looking for. Whether that's your best friend or somebody you don't know, that doesn't really matter on one side. On the other side, when it comes to the founder relationship and setting up your first thing, pay attention to shareholder agreement, to articles of association, to the legalities of how you manage on paper your relationship. Because if you hit the jackpot and there's a successful business, trust me, when there will be money that you'll have to split, the friendship will take the kind of second seat, right? And if you don't have your legal things like shareholder agreements sorted out, then that will be a problem. How to find the first employees, customers. Guys ask me about how to find the first employees. It's obviously super hard if you're a first-time founder, limited capital, you don't have a lot of experience, your brand is not known. So my answer from my experience has always been, in the beginning, expect that it's a very difficult process, both for finding customers customers and for employees. And what I mean by that is like a 2 steps ahead and 1 step back process, where first you get a bit of funding from maybe, seed investors. You can build a little shitty website. You test out your idea, okay, that you want to sell this thing online. It kind of works. Your first employees are going to be 20-year-olds that have little business experience. Okay, you kind of validate that step, lets you raise a bit more funding. Then you can build a better website that allows you to get more revenue, and you can hire already somebody that's more professional at like product management, right? And it's a step-by-step process. You have to have some natural leadership ability, and you probably know it whether you have it or not. You know it from childhood, from your experience. If you want to be a founder, you cannot build businesses and teams if you don't have a natural ability to get people behind you. And I don't mean a great presenter or speaker. Those are all things that you can learn. But you have to have a natural ability to be a leader, to persuade people so that they're excited to be with you. If you don't have that ability, and that's normal, if you don't have it, you probably have something else, then I would suggest don't go into business, don't start a company, because that is super critical, especially for getting the first employees. Customers, I would split consumers and enterprise customers. Consumers you can get through Google ads, Facebook ads. I'm not going to go into that. Enterprise customers, big clients, right, that would pay you hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. In my experience, getting enterprise customers is similar to getting investors. And the last section of my presentation, I'll talk about fundraising. And so that kind of goes back to also customers. So I'll talk about that a bit later. How to solve difficult situations. This is interesting. Like, however you do your first business, very quickly you will hit some situations like disputes between co-founders, running out of money, slow growth or terrible growth, complaints from customers. All of that or some of those things will happen. And what I see for younger entrepreneurs, maybe people that have less life experience in dealing with disputes and tough situations, they kind of worry about all of those things at the same time. What my suggestion is always to solve one problem at the time, focus on whatever is the next problem, as opposed to, okay, in 3 years' time, we're going to have like, all these different problems. Don't think about it in such terms at the early stage. Another point, and I've done that a lot, maybe early on and less so now, is that founders try to kind of like hide problems. And not that they're with negative intentions, but with positive intentions, to keep the picture that everything is growing, and that puts a lot of pressure on the founders. From my experience, it's much better in the long term to take a strategy of telling people how things are when they happen. If there's super squeeze on funding, you can tell that to your employees and it will be okay. Most of the time. Some people won't like it, they will leave you, etc. That's the cost you can take with this strategy. But it's super important, just when you have a problem, it's okay to say, yes, that is a problem. We'll fix it, instead of trying to kind of, avoid it. There's this Latvian Russian slang word, pohuism. So like not giving a fuck approach in business. Why? Because first of all, we're not saving, children's lives. I mean, like the worst thing that's going to happen is your business goes bankrupt. A couple of people lose their jobs. They're probably going to find the next job a month later. I personally know for myself, I put huge amounts of pressure back when I was like early 20s on making the business successful. I was so stressed, had like panic attacks sometimes and so on. It's not really worth it. Right? And sometimes if you kind of reduce the stress level, you can make better decisions and you can enjoy that whole experience a lot more. How to start a business abroad. So why this topic specifically? Because obviously we're in Latvia, it's a small country. Assuming you're from here, not from the US or China or whatever, then I'm jokingly saying, okay, there's 2 ways to make a lot of money. One is through government contracts. Not an expert in that. Not saying it's bad, it's fine. Or the other one is obviously you can start here, but you have to go international. You have to expand fairly quickly or eventually at some point. Again, why did we go international? Not because, again, we had this vision that is going to be this global company, like a lot of people, blah, blah, blah. Not really. The reason why was because the Latvian regulator, TAC, bless them, best institution in the world, they came up with this idea that they're going to license all the non-bank finance entities back in, I think, 2011 or 12, and that the license is going to cost 70,000 euros, and the paid capital is going to be 500,000. For the context, back then, our portfolio, so that's the loans we've given out to consumers, was 50,000 euros. So that's like now we would have to buy a $500 million license to exist, right? Completely impossible. That's the reason why we decided, okay, let's just try to copy what we've done for the first year and a half in our business, opened this website and had these processes, etc. Let's just go and do that somewhere else in Czech Republic, because we're going to die in Latvia because there's this regulation coming. That's the reason why we started international expansion. To the VCs, we're saying we had this fucking great idea, the vision, the analysis, all of that. But the reality was very different. Long story short, in Latvia, we also survived. We managed to get through this regulation regulation, but we went into Czech Republic in 2012, which is basically like a year after we had started in Latvia. We had like 6-7 people in our Latvian office, and we were already in Prague, kind of like walking the streets of Prague and trying to like build a business there. And so with that, we made all the classic mistakes when it comes to international expansion. A few of those are that we try to do everything ourselves. That's myself and my business partner. We would go there, we would go to these different vendors like accounting companies, debt collection, blah, blah, blah. Spoke fuck all English. We were trying to like communicate. It didn't work, and that was very difficult. We did a fairly bad funding deal. We gave more than half the company away to an investor because we were very keen to just get in there and like, you know, accept any terms that were there on the market. And we tried to do everything ourselves. Like I said, hire the people ourselves. We had a lot of cultural barriers, even though it's Czech Republic, it seems like it's EU, but it's, you know, it's different. And so we were struggling because everything was supposed to be done by us. Again, we put ourselves very quickly in a position of having to really learn from real life circumstances. So we learned fast. So on the fundraising side, we understood that when we go into new countries, we cannot give up control of the business. We have to retain control more than 50%. It's very important. Most importantly, we understood we have to hire the country manager locally on the ground as the first thing that you do, as opposed to like build the whole fucking business and then 2 years later you find the CEO. That's just wrong. We learned to figure out how to make teams in Latvia cooperate with teams in Czech Republic, you know, project management and matrix management and things like that. A few lessons here. Again, even a small business can expand internationally. It forces you to learn. So the lesson is, depending though on a business model, you can be small and you can go quickly into new markets. It's possible, right? But it depends on a business model. Again, lesson, we simply got lucky that the business model was inherently good to scale into different countries. The luck plays a massive role. Everybody likes to say that they're all fucking self-made, etc., etc. We're not self-made. Luck is super important. We were lucky largely to have a good business model, to have circumstances that forced us to go into a new country because we didn't have the foresight, the vision. That was built later for the bullshit stories for the VCs. So this leads us to the last piece about fundraising. You know this guy? Yes, Nelson Mandela. I mean, he was also probably a great fundraiser, but he had this quote: "It always seems impossible until it's done." Especially in my early fundraising days, it was just like a fucking nightmare, difficult, took everything out of me, a lot of meetings, rejections. So a last few points in terms of fundraising. So first and foremost, big funding rounds, when you read all these TechCrunch stories about a company that's raised a huge seed round, a huge Series A, etc. For some people it's evident, and I don't want to accuse you that if you understand that it's evident, it does not mean it's a successful company. It likely means that it will be, or it's already a successful company. It's possible, but it's not, you know, the equation sign. It's very important to make that distinction. Why is it like that? It's because of the Silicon Valley style of doing business. Let's just build unicorns, growth at all costs, and then the media that is obsessed with unicorns. And that's a distorted perception of, you know, the business world. There are so many other ways of how people get rich, so many other ways of how people realize their potential in business than building a tech unicorn, right? Even though in the media, that's all we read about most of the time. So that's just for context. So the question is, do you really need outside capital? Oftentimes, it doesn't even go into the heads of young founders to understand that you could build a company funded from the customers that pay you money for the fucking product that you sell them. So we're all thinking that to build a business, that means just raising money from the VCs. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that there are different alternatives. And if you look statistically, what's more likely, what's more possible for you to have a successful business career is if you build a company that has reasonable growth, 20, 30% per year, year on year, you don't give up a lot of equity in the company, right? Maybe you raise some money in the beginning, it's possible, but it's not like you raise funding round after funding round, etc. In a period of 10 to 20 years, maybe even more, so a significant part of your professional career, you spend to that one company, but you end up with a business that generates in your year 10, 15 or 20 profits such that the company pays you dividends to you as an owner of the business. I'm not talking revenue or like whatever profit. I mean dividends in your pocket in the amount of 1 to 2, 3 or more million per year. That is a great scenario, and people oftentimes don't think about it that way. So the other scenario that the media is more promoting is a tech business with a potentially a unicorn valuation built in 5 years, or hundreds of millions or tens of millions of VC money raised, and then the founder, you get rich if you manage to sell your shares. The chances of that happening are statistically much smaller, and your ability to control that outcome is much smaller compared to that scenario of a company over a 20-year period. You retain the control. It's not like going to be all over Forbes, but you're going to be a rich fuck and nobody to account to. Last couple of actual points instead of ranting. Start small. So what I mean here is, ideally, your business idea is such that doesn't take a lot of money, $500,000, couple of 100,000, up to $1 million. That's a good way to think about starting a business. Split your tickets into, again, 10, 20, 50, 100K, as opposed to a big, 1 or 2 million investment that you need to raise. That's very difficult. Talk to your first, second level network, to people you know directly or that you know through a person. That's more likely to give you some results, even though there are people that say that they have managed to get funding only from people that they don't know, because the people that they do know always think that they're never going to build a good business. So this is, tricky. My experience is, first and second level contacts in the beginning are kind of more likely to give a result. And in terms of how to structure the fundraise, do what's called a safe round or a convertible debt. If that's a bit too technical, I can explain what it means. And so that's just an easier way to get smaller tickets and get up and running. Repetition is key. So the way I think about fundraise, especially for a business that has to fundraise constantly, is funding is a department in your company the same way finance, product, legal is, right? It's a fundamental part of your business. For some, it's not. For some, it's just in the beginning. And so therefore, if it's an important part of your business, then allocate resources accordingly. And what it means on a practical basis for the beginning is your pitch deck, right? There's a tons of YouTube, there's millions of suggestions of how to build your pitch deck, how to do it well. But learn to pitch your company in a couple of minutes so well that you can go into any meeting and talk to a person that's not a business person and not related to your industry, and in 1 minute they understand fundamentally what business model you're talking about, why could it be potentially good, why you're raising the money, how you're going to use it, and why you're reasonably good at potentially executing. I've seen so many times people are like enthusiastic, they come to an investor meeting and then they start kind of improvising, what is the business, okay, etc., etc. And if 2 minutes and I don't understand the idea, I'm fucking gone, right? And that's how investors think. And so just put in the effort to write the script, repeat it, test it out with friends or whatever, professionals, just nail down that skill. And of course, in terms of my experience, if you talk to investors 10, 20, 30, 40 times, that's not a fundraise. I've been fundraising reaching 200, 300, 400 different investors. And I don't mean sending an email, I mean actual call or a physical meeting where I'm presenting the business. And accordingly, I've gotten 400-ish rejections or just no answers. So that's a numbers game. You got to have that endurance there big time. Constant feedback, I mean, this is more like minor point. What I did in the early days, and I suggest people do as a way to learn, is when you're talking to friendly investors, some buddies that have some money that, could potentially invest, not like high stakes VC. Ask them feedback about your pitch, whether they understand, whether they believe, any feedback that they can give you, like authentically, right? Don't be afraid to get negative feedback, some learning, some criticism, etc. And also ask for suggestions for those investors to introduce you with other investors. Most of the times, they will either lie and say, yeah, sure, I'm going to pass on your deck to somebody else. They will never do. Sometimes, though, if they like it and they consider putting in the money, they will forward it to somebody that's maybe an expert in that industry or for whatever other reasons. And you can hit like a good jackpot with having more good introductions. The most important piece is this picture. So this is the fundraising process. Back in 2011, that's my business partner Davis, and that's a darker skinned guy is my friend from university, a guy from a rich family from Azerbaijan. So we were hanging out and drinking and shit, and we managed to get money from him. It was all good times, and then I'm usually laughing. So later on, 9 years later, that's the fundraising process. We have gray hair guys, water, laptops, and so on. Anyway, so most importantly, if you like this, subscribe, and I'll be appreciative of that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Amazing. Not that small. Wow. What is a hoodie?
Oh,
well,
sorry.
I can take both.
No.